I find this disgusting. But an order is an order. Major Trapp wipes his tears with the sleeve of his uniform right there in front of the formation. Poland. 5 in the morning, a sticky fog hanging low. The men standing before him aren't elite soldiers, they're not fanatics. This is the Father's Battalion, 500 ordinary working men from Hamburg who, just a month ago, were checking tickets on trams and drinking beer on weekends. In 1 hour, they are expected to turn the village of Józefów into a slaughterhouse. 1,800 women and children shot by hand, point blank. But Trapp does something unthinkable. He gives them a legal way out. Anyone who doesn't feel up to it, just step out of line. There will be no punishment, I promise. They had a choice. There was no gun to their heads, just the heavy morning silence and the eyes of the men standing next to them. In that silence, 488 men chose to become executioners. Not for Hitler. They were simply afraid of looking weak in front of the guys they knew. And the most terrifying part, every single one of them was convinced he was a good person. Just like us, right now. And every one of us carries the same illusion, that in the decisive moment we would have stepped out of line. When we hear stories about atrocities, the first thing that flares up inside is how? Why? How could anyone let this happen? And right after that comes an instant inner sorting. This is cruel. I would never do that. This isn't just a thought, it's a need. We physically cannot place ourselves in the category of those who stay silent, those who look away, those who comply. But here's the thing. Battalion 101 wasn't an anomaly. Historian Christopher Browning studied their case and discovered that there were hundreds of similar units. And the percentage of those who refused was roughly the same everywhere. No more than 10 to 15%, sometimes less. Germany in the 1930s wasn't a country of psychopaths. It was a country with universities, opera houses, philosophy departments. People discussed Goethe and went to church on Sundays. They didn't wake up one morning as villains. They slid, slowly, step by step. First, agreeing to stay quiet. Then, agreeing not to notice. Then, agreeing to participate. Each next step was barely different from the one before, and that is far more frightening than any theory of innate evil. Because innate evil is convenient. It lets you say, they were different from us. But they weren't different. That's the whole mechanism. Historian Christopher Browning spent years trying to understand what happened inside these men's heads. He dug through interrogation transcripts, testimonies, letters, and he found something that breaks the familiar picture. They weren't zombies. They weren't programmed. Many of them vomited in the first hours, cried, drank themselves unconscious that evening. Some asked to be reassigned to the perimeter, away from the shooting pits. Some got the transfer, some didn't. But almost no one took Trapp up on his offer to leave. Why? Browning identifies several layers, and none of them is called cruelty. The first layer is the gradient. These men didn't start with executions. First came escorting, then guarding the ghetto, then loading people onto trains. Each next step was only slightly different from the last, and at every point it was easier to continue than to stop. Because stopping means admitting something. If I refuse now, it means everything I've done up to this point was wrong, and that's unbearable. Easier to take one more step. The second layer is the identity trap. During post-war interrogations, one of the battalion's policemen said something that Browning placed at the center of his research. "I didn't want them to think I was a coward. Not, I believed in the order. Not, I hated Jews. I didn't want to look weak, in front of men just like me." Stepping out of line didn't just mean refusing an order. It meant ceasing to be part of the group, betraying the men standing beside you. And here's the paradox. The feeling of camaraderie, one of the finest human qualities, became the very mechanism that kept people in line. The third layer is the buffers. Psychologist Albert Bandura described this as moral disengagement, a set of cognitive strategies that allow a person to act against their own values without destroying their self-image. The brain builds layers of insulation between you and what you're doing. I'm following orders. If this were wrong, the commander wouldn't have ordered it. They won't survive anyway. I'm just shortening the suffering. Everyone else is doing it, so it must be normal. Each buffer on its own is small, but together they build a wall that responsibility cannot pass through. Browning writes that those who pulled the trigger later described it as though it had happened to someone else, as if they were watching from the outside. One of the policemen recalled that he stopped seeing faces. After a few hours, everything blurred into mechanical action, like a conveyor belt. Not because he was heartless, but because his psyche had shut down everything that got in the way of continuing. And here is where it gets truly uncomfortable. In 1973, psychologists John Darley and Daniel Babson ran an experiment at Princeton Theological Seminary. A group of theology students were given an assignment: walk to the building next door and deliver a sermon. The topic of the sermon: the parable of the Good Samaritan, about a man who stopped to help when everyone else walked past. On the way, each student passed a man lying in an alley, groaning, clearly in need of help. There was one variable. Some students were told they were running late, others were not. Among those who weren't in a hurry, 63% stopped to help. Among those who were late, 10%. People who were literally on their way to give a speech about the importance of not walking past, walked past. Not because they were bad, not because they didn't care, but because inside their heads, a voice was saying, "Not now. I need to be somewhere else. This isn't my moment." Not now might be the two most dangerous words in the history of human morality. Because they don't cancel the intention to be good, they just postpone it. And then, later never comes. Because later, it's not now again. And this is where the circle closes. The 488 men in Josefov were not people who wanted to kill. They were people who didn't step out of line, each for his own reason. The gradient, camaraderie, buffers. It's not for me to decide. Not now. Everyone else is staying too. And now, the part that makes it truly terrifying. Most of them internally disagreed. They suffered. They felt it was wrong. But they didn't act. And that gap between, "I don't think this is right," and, "but I'm doing it anyway," is what allowed them to say afterward, "I was against it. Deep down, I wasn't like that." This is exactly how the illusion of bravery works. We picture ourselves as the ones who suffer but make the right choice. But suffering without action is not resistance. It's just discomfort. And discomfort is precisely what 488 out of 500 felt. 2013. A sterile bank office. Sunshine outside the window, dead fluorescent light inside. A clerk behind the counter has sweaty palms. His target for today is 8 new accounts. His system shows 0. He knows what tomorrow morning at 8 will look like, the circle of shame. The manager will pull up the results table on the screen, and those at the bottom will officially become dead weight. Outcasts who get screamed at in front of everyone. He watches the colleague across from him typing away confidently. That guy isn't looking for new clients. He's simply taking existing customers' data and opening second, third, fifth accounts in their names, without their knowledge. Is it illegal? Yes. Is it fraud? Absolutely. But the clerk can see everyone's doing it. The system doesn't ask him to hate the customers. It asks him to be a team player. He takes a deep breath, picks up the file of the elderly woman who came in that morning, and presses enter. That click doesn't kill anyone. It just creates a number in a report. Over 5 years, 5,000 normal employees, loving fathers, polite neighbors, will open 3.5 million fake accounts. None of them thought of themselves as criminals. They just didn't want to be humiliated at the morning meeting. In Józefów, you had to pull a trigger. Here, you had to press a key on a keyboard. The mechanism is the same. The fear of being not like everyone else is stronger than any moral code. Are you still sure you would have stepped out of line? And now, the turning point. The problem was never a lack of courage. Courage is a word we use to describe other people's actions in hindsight. Those 12 men who stepped out of line in Józefów, in that moment, they didn't feel like heroes. They felt awkward, strange, out of place. Some of them stepped out not for moral reasons. They simply couldn't physically bring themselves to shoot. This isn't poster bravery. It's a glitch, a moment when the mechanism of obedience broke down for some reason. The problem was the idea itself, that bravery is a character trait, because as long as you believe that being brave is something you already have, like your height or your eye color, you don't need to do anything. You're already on the right side, by default, automatically, without a single act. And it's precisely this certainty, there's no way I'd stay silent, that makes silence the most likely outcome. Because the one who doubts is the one who prepares, and the one who's certain just waits for the moment that, in his mind, will be obvious. But the moment is never obvious. It's always disguised as routine. Those 12 out of 500, they didn't pass some moral test. And the 488 didn't fail one. All 500 stood in the same formation, heard the same order, looked at the same morning sky. The difference wasn't in who they were. The difference was in what happened in one specific second. And that second doesn't warn you. Right now, you're sure you know how you would act. But here's a question worth asking yourself. When was the last time you stayed silent? Not because you agreed, but because it was uncomfortable to speak up. And how exactly was that different from what those 488 did?